Imagine facing an ice age wind with almost nothing between your skin and the cold. So why did humans start wearing clothes in the first place? The first clothes probably weren't about looking good. They were a survival tool, something humans could use to fight cold, wind, and other environmental stresses. An animal hide could turn a miserable night into a survivable one. But scientists can't simply find an ancient shirt, because most early clothing disappeared long ago. Archaeologists have found very ancient tools capable of processing animal hides, but a hide scraper alone doesn't prove that someone was wearing clothes. It could have been used for many purposes. And then scientists found a surprisingly strange clue. Lice, body lice, live in clothing, giving researchers a biological trail to follow. Genetic studies suggest that head lice and clothing lice diverged roughly 83,000 to 170,000 years ago. That means humans were likely using clothing by at least that broad window. Clothing may have become especially important as humans encountered colder environments. Protection from cold would have made movement into challenging climates much easier. But the earliest clothing was probably nothing like a modern jacket. It likely started as simple coverings, gradually becoming more fitted and sophisticated over time. So protection was useful, but movement mattered too. Hunters needed clothing that stayed on the body while they ran, climbed, crawled, and worked. Try running, hunting, or climbing while wearing a blanket, and you'll quickly understand the problem. Humans didn't just discover hides, they learned to work them. Cutting, scraping, and shaping materials opened the door to something far more useful. To turn separate pieces into clothing, humans needed something that could join them together. Natural fibers, sinew, and other materials could serve as primitive fasteners. Once people could join pieces together, clothing didn't have to remain a loose blanket. It could begin following the shape of the body. Now clothing did something important. It protected the body without completely restricting movement. That could make everyday survival much easier. And protection wasn't only about temperature. Clothing could also help shield the body from wind, plants, terrain, and other environmental hazards. But humans rarely stop at simply solving a problem. Once clothing became useful, people could change how it looked, how it fit, and eventually what it communicated. Once clothing became something humans could shape, a new possibility appeared. Maybe what you wore could tell other people something about you. Different people could choose different materials, shapes, or decorations. Over time, clothing could become part of how people expressed identity and belonging. Humans have a long history of decorating objects and bodies. Clothing could provide another surface for that creativity. But researchers have to be careful about exactly when this began. Clothing also had to match the environment. Thick materials could help in cold conditions, while lighter coverings made more sense when temperatures rose. Good clothing wasn't just about looking different. It had to work. It needed to stay attached while people hunted, traveled, climbed, and worked. Even after clothing became more sophisticated, survival remained at its core. The better it protected the body, the farther humans could push into difficult environments. Clothing wasn't developing alone. It was part of a much bigger story. Tools, hunting, cooperation, migration, and increasingly complex human societies. Maybe clothing became powerful for the same reason so many human inventions did. It solved a physical problem, and then became part of our social world. Clothing had started as protection from the world, but once humans learned to design it, something else became possible. What you wore could potentially communicate identity, belonging, and even the activities you performed. Clothing could also reflect a person's activities. Hunters, travelers, and workers might need different kinds of protection for the jobs they performed. Humans also collected unusual natural objects. Shells, teeth, feathers, stones, and other materials could become more than useful objects. They could become meaningful ones. Decoration doesn't necessarily mean modern fashion. Even a simple object added to clothing could carry personal meaning or make one person visually different from another. Imagine meeting strangers who dress differently from your own group. Even without speaking, those visual differences could help communicate who belonged where. It's possible that clothing and ornaments helped people recognize identity and group connections, but the exact meanings of prehistoric garments are difficult to recover. As human communities became more organized, what people wore could exist alongside roles, activities, relationships, and shared traditions. The same invention could serve several purposes at once: protection, movement, and eventually, communication. That's a pattern humans repeat again and again. So the real story isn't simply that humans invented clothes to stay warm. Clothing became a technology built from the materials, environments, and social lives of humans. Clothing may have helped humans survive different worlds, but the strangest part is that almost none of those first garments survived. So how do we know they existed at all? Here is the problem. Ancient clothing was usually made from materials that decay, so archaeologists rarely find the actual clothes. Instead, researchers look for clues, like tools that were useful for preparing hides. But even these clues don't automatically prove someone was wearing clothing. A hide could have been a blanket, shelter material, container, or clothing. One artifact can have many possible explanations. One of the strangest clues comes from lice. Body lice live mainly in clothing, so their evolutionary history can give researchers an indirect window into when humans began regularly wearing it. Genetic research on lice has suggested that clothing use may date back roughly tens of thousands of years, possibly around 83,000 to 170,000 years ago. But that's a range, not an exact invention date. Researchers can also study microscopic traces, fibers, wear patterns, and other material clues. Sometimes the smallest evidence can tell the biggest story. Then there are sewing tools. Bone needles show that humans eventually had the technology to make much more complex fitted garments. With better tools came better clothing. Sewing allowed humans to create garments that fit the body instead of simply hanging from it. Better clothing didn't just make life more comfortable. It could help humans operate in places where the environment itself was a major survival challenge. So after all these clues, what was the real reason humans started wearing clothes? The answer probably wasn't just one thing. First came the most obvious pressure: the environment. Clothing helped protect vulnerable skin from cold, wind, and harsh conditions. But cold wasn't the only challenge. Covering the body could also provide protection from rough vegetation, terrain, and other everyday hazards. Then clothing became something humans could improve. A fitted garment could protect the body while still allowing people to hunt, travel, and work. Human ingenuity changed the simple covering into something much more useful. Sewing and shaping allowed clothing to fit the body and work with it. And then came another layer. People could make clothing different. What you wore could potentially become part of identity, belonging, or personal expression. Clothing didn't just help humans survive where they already lived. It may have helped them function in places with very different climates and conditions. So there probably wasn't a single reason. Clothing solved several problems at once: protection, warmth, movement, and eventually social communication. The real breakthrough wasn't simply putting something on the body. It was learning that humans could change their environment and themselves to survive it. Humans probably didn't start wearing clothes for fashion. We wore them because surviving was hard. And once we learned how to turn hides, fibers, tools, and imagination into protection, clothing became one of humanity's earliest technologies. From survival came technology. From technology came culture. And that simple piece of clothing changed what humans could do. If this changed the way you see everyday life, follow for more hidden stories from human history.